Hi, I'm Jeff Kowalczyk, and today I'm going to be talking about telling your story through compliance reporting, specifically optimizing Form 990 for use by grantor and donor organizations and individuals. IRS Form 990 is an information return which is filed with the IRS by not-for-profit organizations instead of a traditional tax return. And it serves two purposes primarily. One is that it allows the government to oversee nonprofit organizations and ensure that they aren't abusing their tax-exempt status. And then it makes the returns and information about not-for-profit organizations available for the public, because Form 990, unlike some other tax returns, is available for public inspection with very limited exceptions. Form 990 has been around since 1941, where it was first issued as a 2-page return. The current Form 990 includes a 12-page core form that all organizations that meet the thresholds for requiring the regular 990 must file, plus 15 additional schedules which may be required based on the activities and the nature of the organization. For smaller organizations, there are two other kinds of Form 990s. There's a Form 990EZ, which is available, and that's a smaller form, and then even smaller organizations are eligible to file a Form 990N, which is also called the 990 postcard, and that is a simple 8-item questionnaire which an organization completes and returns, but that's only available to the smallest of organizations. For today, I'm going to assume that your organization files a traditional Form 990 as opposed to the 990EZ or 990N. A lot of the information that we'll go over today applies to the 990EZ, although some of the page and line numbers may be a little different. Form 990N is such a small return that a lot of the information here may not be relevant, but it doesn't mean that the concepts applied here can't be applied to other documentation that you submit to donors. So the Form 990 is available to donors in a few different ways. One is that it's made publicly available on a number of websites, such as GuideStar and Charity Navigator are two of the most common that are out there. And they have pretty much the whole return. The Schedule B is redacted from the copies made available on those websites, and in some cases signature lines are also redacted or made electronic so that a signature can't be copied. Additionally, organizations are required to make copies of Form 990 available to the general public, either on their website or upon request, or available in paper form in the office. Many significant donors and grantors request a copy of the most recent Form 990 as part of the application process, and they do it for a few reasons. One is that the 990 provides consistency between organizations because it is a very standardized form, and whether you report on a cash basis, accrual basis, whether you have an audit or review, your Form 990 is going to, or at least should, look very consistent as long as your activity is the same. Additionally, since it is required to be made available, if an organization says, oh, we haven't done our 990 or it's not available for some reason, that gives the grantor a pretty good sign that the nonprofit may not be taking rules and regulations seriously enough, and also may not be able to provide evidence that they've followed through on any requirements that may relate to the grant. So if we know that we have to submit a Form 990 and that every organization applying for the grant is also submitting a Form 990, we want to make sure that ours stands out and stands out in a positive way. The first place we can do that is on page 2 of our return in the Program Service Accomplishments section. This is the primary place on the return for your organization to tell its story. There is a line item that requires a description of the major activities and program service accomplishments of the organization during the year. And this can be generic, but it also can be very specific and focused, and there's really no limit to how much you can say. So what you want to make sure you're doing is telling the reader of this return all of your major activities. If possible, you want to focus on outcomes, not necessarily just outputs. Um, and you want to include anything here that helps show how great your organization is, but maybe doesn't fit elsewhere on the return. So if your program has grown in size this year, maybe you can't find another place that makes sense on the return, but you can explain that as part of your accomplishments. You increased from serving 50 people to serving 70 this year. Maybe you receive a significant amount of donated services as part of your program service activities and are able to pass those on to end users. Well, that's something that can't be reflected on the Form 990, but you can include that in your program service accomplishments. So this is something you want to make sure that you are reading and reviewing every year and ensuring that it is communicating what you want donors to know. Beyond the program service accomplishments, there's a lot of other places where you can make sure that you are really presenting everything as good as possible to give the donor comfort in the quality of your organization and its ability to carry out its objectives. And one of those other areas is the schedules of revenues and expenses. You want to make sure that you really are accurately classifying your revenues and expenses, because those are a couple areas that donors are going to look at very intently. So for revenues, if you maybe have multiple programs, there's an area to list the program revenues, and a lot of organizations will just write program fees and have a single number. And if at all possible, you really want to split that out and show the value that you're generating from each of the different programs so they can understand where you are making money and where you need a donor's assistance. Another thing you want to minimize is the use of miscellaneous or other expenses. There certainly are places where those are appropriate and it doesn't make sense to sort of break out $40, but you want to make sure that you don't have 5 to 10% of your revenues or expenses just listed as miscellaneous, because then, a donor wonders, is all of my donation going to become miscellaneous? Is that really how I want my money used? The other thing to consider is the consistency of financial numbers. And what I mean by this is if you, for example, have a 990 that uses a paid preparer and you hire a CPA or enrolled agent to file your return, and then you go to the expenses page and it says that you spent $0 on accounting, well, there's sort of a mismatch there where we can see on page 1 that you've spent the money and then it's not showing up anywhere. So then they wonder, how accurate are these other expenses? Is this something that we should be concerned about? So that's somewhere where you really want to make sure that you are sort of bringing everything together and tying it all together to present that best front. Beyond those areas, there are some other opportunities to put your best foot forward. And one of the important things is on page 5 of the return, there is a list of policy questions asking if you have a whistleblower document, if you have a document retention policy. And you want to read through those and make sure that if you have any of those policies that they are checked yes. Those are things that aren't required by the IRS, but they do require you to disclose whether or not you have them. So if you have them, you really want to let everybody know, because that's a positive thing. And if you don't have them, it might be something you want to look into. And that's really why the IRS put those on the Form 990. But beyond, making the IRS happy, it's also something that donors will like to see. If you had unusual activity during the year, you can use Schedule O, which is basically the other schedule, to explain that activity and provide whatever level of detail is necessary for a reader of the return to understand if you had a significant loss, why it's not indicative of future problems, something like that. Keep in mind that if you're required to attach any of the schedules, and like I said before, there's about 15 of them, if you have to attach a schedule, then information in that and the kind of activity that's required for that schedule is relevant to your organization, and it can be used to further a donor's understanding of your organization. So if you, for instance, have to complete a Schedule M, which is completed if you receive more than $25,000 in donated goods, you want to provide as much detail as possible about what kind of goods you're receiving, how they're valued, why you're receiving them, what you do with them, to the extent you can include within the form, so that someone reading can really get an understanding for what's going on. Additionally, the websites like GuideStar and Charity Navigator that I mentioned before allow you to submit other information to supplement your Form 990. I think it's something that all organizations should do, but especially if you had some sort of unusual activity, it's really a good idea to submit an additional document explaining, and maybe if there was steps that was taken to resolve a problem, anything like that, you can put that up there and give people comfort that your organization is primed and ready to take off in the future. So to wrap things up, if you're preparing your return effectively and doing things right, your Form 990 should be consistent with the financial statements and any other external reporting like an annual report, press releases you may put out, as far as defining the scope and the accomplishments of your organization. If you know the types of organizations that you're competing against, one thing you can do is compare their Form 990 to theirs and see if your Form 990 would earn funding if you were the donor. Would you say, oh yeah, I like your organization, or I like this other organization, and see what they're doing on their return and see if any of that can be brought over to enhance your return. It's important to seek opinions from grantors and those who decide not to provide funding to ensure that you're sending the message that you want to send. So maybe there's one group of grantors that are really getting your mission and they're giving you funding, and if you're only getting feedback from them, then you may not be getting the whole picture. So you want to make sure that you talk not only to the people who give you money, but those who don't. So that's all I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. Thank you and have a wonderful day.